And just like that, FanFest is a week from Saturday, and spring training is right around the corner. Pitchers and catchers reporting in less than 3 weeks. And so, coming up today, I'm going to be talking with Sully from Locked On MLB to talk about the Giants' offseason overall, including the collapse of the Carlos Correa deal. What does the whole thing look like without Correa? So, we'll get into it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes actually 3 days a week for now until pitchers and catchers report, then back to 5. Talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon today to get started. And as I said, coming up on today's show, I'm going to be talking with Sully from Locked On MLB. Sully and I talked, as we'll discuss, like in the brief window of time between when the Giants had signed Correa and when the deal fell apart. And so this is kind of an update on that. We're going to discuss the collapse of the Correa deal, what that felt like to me, to the fan base, and discussing their offseason overall and just in the landscape of the league and the pressure on the Giants to win, and yet the roster that isn't like a slam dunk playoff team. And so without further delay, here is Sully from Locked On MLB.
Sitting in the video green room right now, that's Ben Kaspick. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm over what was a brutal stretch for Giants fandom after the Correa nightmare. Last time we talked, I was in a much better mood, but I've come around, Sully. I've come around.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason. Like, I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit. When the season ended and the Astros won the World Series, I sat down and said, between now and before we're live before pitchers and catchers report, I was going to do an episode for all 30 teams with a host from all 30 teams. I am still too short. I need the Braves and I need the Angels. They will be coming up before pitchers and catchers report. But I've already done a Giants preview with Ben Kaspick. But here's the deal. We had to go back. You know, timing is everything. And when I had you on the show on December 18th, there was a tiny hole of an opportunity, kind of like the vent that Luke shot the proton torpedo in to blow up the Death Star. That tiny shot that you and I were able to come on the podcast and talk about the glories that was the Giants signing Carlos Correa. We talked about how that wiped out the fear of the possible snubbing of not having Aaron Judge on the team. The Giants were a big time player now. Happy days are here again. And let's just face it, a new era of Giants dominance was about to begin. As Carlos Correa, let's face it, they were already making a statue to put on alongside Juan Marichal and Willie Mays and Willie McCovey outside the park. And then, wow. And part of me won't believe that he has a team until I see him on the field wearing a uniform. So walk us through just the absolute stepping on a rake, and that was going through between the 18th, the 20th, the 21st, and the fiasco that led him, of all things, back to Minnesota.
It was a nightmare, and it says over my shoulder, I put this sign up, Correa nightmare. Like, there's only so many words you can fit on this little sign, and that seemed to sum it up in the space I had allowed for it, because you just don't see anything like this. You see sometimes guys fail physicals, but never the players of his stature in the game and superstars. I mean, it's just almost never happens. And really, I think it's unprecedented when you look at the fact that it was a $350 million deal. And I mean, we found out things were going sideways the day that he was supposed to be introduced at a press conference.
Yeah.
So I'm waking up, I'm giddy sitting there like wanting to watch this on TV, seeing him be introduced. And so couldn't be more like it's about to happen. You couldn't be closer to it happening. And then, on Twitter, you get these notifications. Giants say the press conference for Correa has been postponed. And if you read the press release, it was just very, very short, very little detail. It just said today's Giants press conference has been postponed with no explanation given. And then, it's a day of anguish, wondering what the heck is going on. There's reports that they're waiting on tests and no answers by the end of the day. And so I'm playing chess online, getting ready to go to bed that night at like 11:30 p.m. And I check Twitter one more time before going to bed, and I see John Heyman says Correa to Mets, 12 years, 315 million. And it was just not good. It was not good. And a lot of people got to sleep that night, but for me, it was tough to sleep. And because it was late, but man. And so there's so much to this story, but that was kind of the initial reaction. It was just a devastating turn of events in like a span of 12 hours.
And it was just embarrassing in so many ways. But I'm going to try to shed some positivity on this in a second. But it was so weird because then the Mets signed him, but then he failed the Mets physical. And that's when I said, hey, Mets, did you think the Giants were lying? It was kind of like, do you think they're just that dumb? And of course, I'm picturing him in a full body cast at one point. But it was just to see a play. Here's what it's so strange that a player of his magnitude and his recognition and his impact, that his free agency the year before was kind of strange because there were teams that desperately needed a shortstop. I'm looking at you, Yankees. I'm looking at you, Cubs. I'm looking at you, Baltimore. Looking at you, St. Louis. And that he went, and at one point I was like, well, he's probably just going to go back and sign a short deal with the Astros. But no, he didn't. He went to Minnie, and it just felt like, okay, he's just there, kind of like how Pudge Rodriguez was with the Marlins for 1 year. And he's just there to show everyone he's still Carlos Correa and then get the big deal. So you've had 2 consecutive free agencies involving this guy that were a little strange. And then to have him like, were there Correa jerseys printed out and available? Because I may
No,
wear one to Oracle Park.
you can get a custom one, and I'm sure we'll be seeing some over time. And Judge, I mean, how about Arson Judge? They had Judge for 7 minutes, and they had Correa for 7 days, and that's the story of the Giants offseason. Because
And
John Heyman saying that the Giants looked like they were getting Judge, and 7 minutes later he walked it back. So, like for the fan base, just a torturous outcome for these 2 players. For Judge, I mean, look, 7 minutes is 7 minutes, but I mean, Heyman said it appears Judge is headed to the Giants. And when John Heyman says that, as much as people clown on John Heyman, and a lot of it deserved perhaps, but he's a legit reporter. And so we thought we were getting Judge too, in addition to Correa. We got neither.
when you think of Carlos Correa, which team comes to your mind first, the Giants or the Mets?
I mean, for me, the Mets thing dragged on longer, but for me, it's the Giants. But I don't know what the average person would think.
Well, look,
Neither.
when you went into this off season and you thought, okay, where's he going to go? What would have been the odds of him bouncing between the Giants and the Mets, only to return back to Minnesota? I think the odds, if you were a betting person, they'd be astronomically tiny. If you put your money on that, probably a rich man today. By the way, if you are a betting person, check out our new sportsbook partnership with FanDuel, the #1 sportsbook in America. FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet on Super Bowl 57, huh? With a no sweat first bet. Say that 3 times fast. Where you get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets. You heard that. $3,000 back in bonus bet if your bet doesn't win. So that's 50-50 right there. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to the point spreads to who will score a touchdown. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and easy to use. Best of all, you get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, we're here with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Confused Giants. I'm going to shine a little bit of, for the lack of a better word, positivity, I guess. Besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you like to play? Sort of positivity on this situation here. Wouldn't you rather find out he's not going to be someone healthy for 13 years, 7 days into it, instead of 7 years into it, realizing you have another 6 years to go? I mean, in some ways, if you take a look, it's clear they have that money to spend. Aren't you better off saying, yeah, it would have been great to get an MVP candidate in his prime on your team? On the same token, aren't you better off not having him break down on your watch?
Yeah, and that's when I said, I'm over it by this point. The raw feelings of it being so immediate, and right away, like I'm mentioning that night and my reaction, and in the coming days, and then, like you said, the Mets, like what did they think was going to happen? It seemed like they must be willing to they must know what's going on to some extent, and that they're willing to deal with it, and that the Giants are just being scaredy cats about it. But when the Mets then balked at the physical, it really, in my opinion, vindicated the Giants. It's got to be tough. They knew that they were going to get torched by the fans for this. But when all is said and done, you definitely, if your doctors are telling you don't sign this guy to this deal, it takes, belief in your process to really walk away from it. And ultimately, I do think they clearly made the right decision, because he ended up accepting $150 million less. And so something's going on there.
Right.
And what's really unfortunate, though, is that he was like the last impact player left. If this had happened in the first couple weeks of free agency, you could move on to somebody else. But when this fell apart, there was nobody else. And even Dansby Swanson, I thought, would have been a decent fallback option for the Giants. And he had signed between the period that the Giants deal was announced and when it fell apart. And so there's that little window, like you said, that we talked in. And during that window, Swanson signed with the Cubs. Not that I think he's a great fit for what the Giants are going after. I thought, Trey Turner, obviously Aaron Judge, Xander Bogaerts even, but also Swanson. Carlos Rodon, he also signed in that little window. And so they could have pivoted to some guys, but those guys were gone. And so, yeah, like you said, they're clearly willing to spend that money. And so you look ahead to next offseason, Shohei Ohtani is going to be out there. Manny Machado, maybe, if he opts out, it's going to be out there.
I'm sure, man.
And then,
unless Machado gets injured, he's almost certain to opt out. Why wouldn't he? If he
right.
puts up another MVP caliber season, why wouldn't he opt out?
I agree. 100%. Right. So, yeah. And the Giants are willing to do this kind of thing. They outbid everybody. I think the next closest offer, they gave him, $350 was the agreement, and the next closest offer was like $280 initially. And so they were willing to do what it took to get the guy, but just the timing of it, in that there was nobody left, and some of the Rodon and Swanson, they were just barely gone after spending, quite a while on the market. So
Yeah.
it stinks, but yeah, you'd rather make this decision than be stuck with an injured player for 13 years.
You made a great point in what you just said, in that they showed they're willing to sign a player. They showed they're willing to pay top dollar for a legit star. And Shohei Ohtani is going to be a free agent. Now, Mike Trout resigned to stay with the Angels because he came up through the system. He is statistically the greatest angel of all time. And I'm sure he is basically thinking, I got to win here. This is my legacy. I'm going to be like Tony Gwynn, staying with his team forever. And I got to bring this team to the promised land. It would, if he goes to if he went to the Phillies or someplace and then won there, it would not have been. He knows he has to be there for an Angels title. Shohei Ohtani has none of those connections. He signed because they showed up with a Brinks truck full of money. He thought, oh, great, I get to play with, I get to play with Mike Trout, and maybe we'll be contenders. They didn't. He's going to be a free agent, and he's probably looking around going like, bye, toodaloo. And there are teams out there that could certainly use him and the star power. And if the Giants want to show they are indeed a big market team, which they are by all definitions, they are, and they want to show that they can spend like the big boys, well, maybe this falling apart for Correa will open up the fact that, Ohtani, is he repped by Boris? I can't remember.
I
Whomever
don't think
his,
so.
yeah, whomever his agent is, to say, the Giants seem to have found hundreds of millions of dollars in the cushions of their couch. And imagine what a huge star Ohtani would be in San Francisco. He'd get out of the Anaheim purgatory, be able to pitch and hit and do all those things. Granted, it's not a hitter's ballpark, but it is a pitcher's ballpark. And
Right.
and a lot. Maybe he won't hit 40 home runs, but he'll hit a ton of doubles into the gap. He's an absolute perfect fit for San Francisco, I think, and maybe Correa whiffing on the physical may open the door to bring in Ohtani.
We can only hope. And unfortunately, you got to wait many months to get there at this point. And the 2023 season is not as exciting without a Carlos Correa. But I think eventually down the road, if you and I, when we talk next offseason, it could end up working out for the best. But for 2023, the Giants are kind of a fringe contender as it is. And I think Correa like pushed them into the territory of a, if not probable playoff team, a possible slash likely, somewhat likely playoff team. And so they're in that point where like every win matters a lot. And Correa kind of pushed them over the top to a degree into playoff territory now, especially with the expanded field. And then, like I said, there was nobody to replace that production with once it fell apart. There were no free agents out there who could come close to matching that kind of value, even their own free agent like a Carlos Rodon. So, and then I do have my questions about, I mean, Otani's going to be so in demand. And I think like I feel like the Dodgers, they didn't spend money this offseason. They're clearly maybe loading up for a run at Ohtani. I think the Yankees are going to be involved. I think the Padres, you can't count them out ever. So there's going to be a lot of competition. And generally, it's not a great free agent class. There's Devers came off the board, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Machado, if he does get hurt, maybe he doesn't opt out. He probably does opt out, but if something goes wrong, maybe he's not even available. And then it's like Ohtani or bust. And so a big key for the Giants is going to be to start to develop some stars again. That was
Right.
the key in the early part of the decade with the championships was a lot of homegrown talent, and they've kind of been lacking that outside of like Logan Webb and Camilo Doval. They need some position player young talent to kind of break through and help along the way.
Do you know what this team needs? It needs a boost. It needs that little boost before, to get themselves built up get the muscles going, get the blood flowing, and be a relevant team to be attractive. If Otani was a free agent after the 107 win year they had in 2021, then the Giants would have looked like, oh my God, bring him in. But instead, we had you and I said this in the last time. I don't think they're as good as 107 wins, and I don't think they're as bad as 81 wins. I think they exist somewhere in the middle. How do you get that little boost to get from that 81 wins to really into the playoffs? I see you give them all a Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, you got to try a Built Bar. Look at we're in the new year. We're almost a month into it. Have you gotten rid of all of your New Year's resolutions? One of mine was to be healthier, eat a little healthier, but you want to compromise in taste. I got the great thing for you. Got to try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious. You'll think they're good for you. That's perfect to keep your New Year's resolutions going on to the next month. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, you didn't mishear me. Real chocolate. Great flavors. You don't believe me? Churro. Bam. Peanut butter brownie. Boom. Coconut almond. What? I'm not sure how Built does it. These taste great. They taste like a candy bar, but they have great macros. You like stats? We use advanced sabermetrics with these Built bars. But you want the traditional stats? 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And each one have at least 15 or 16 WAB, wins above replacement bar. That's just so good. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. Remember, you used to have to wait for them to come in, and you'd be hoping the mailman shows up. You're leaning over the railing of your patio going, mailman, are you bringing me the Built bars? You could still do that. You could go to built.com, make your little box. But you can head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section and say, barkeep, Built bars, please. And said, they're over there, please. I'm filling out a prescription. You get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, coconut puffs, or Sam's Club. Go in there, grab a 13-bar box, get 20 13-bar boxes. That would be 260 bars with our hit flavors, brownie batter, churro. Go do it and thank me later. Oh, Built Bar. You know the jingle. Built Bar. They're still good. We're here with Ben Kasvik of Locked On Giants doing a review, preview, recap, rewind, restream, all the different things. So the Giants weren't stagnant this offseason. They did make some moves. I know that's, it's a little bit like, hey, I know I promised you a car on Christmas morning, but did you like the egg beater I got you? Huh? I mean, tell me your thoughts on the moves now that they're no longer complementing one massive move with other complementary moves. Now these are the complementary moves are the moves.
It's not as good if you were expecting that car and you're looking at your egg beater. It's, Mitch Haniger, Michael Conforto. I like those guys. I think that they've both had some really good seasons in the past, and the Giants are hoping that they can get another one or two or three out of those guys. And their pitching depth, they lost Carlos Rodon, and they didn't replace him with that kind of an arm. But what they did is they kind of went with quantity. They bring in Ross Stripling, who had a great year with Toronto. They bring in Sean Manaea, and they bring in somebody else whose name I'm blanking on, who the other starter they brought in, or maybe it was just those two. Yeah, I think it was actually just those two, and then 2 relievers. They bring in Taylor Rogers, who's the twin brother of Tyler, which is fun and good, and Luke Jackson, who was a big part of that 2021 Braves bullpen. Right. That was such a strength of that team. And he's recovering from Tommy John, and it's going to miss like a month or so, maybe 2. But yeah, I mean, they kind of, a couple outfielders, a couple starters, a couple relievers, they made their team better, even though they lose the high end guy in Rodon. So their moves are solid, but Correa is what brought it all together. and there's just not going to be any changing that unless they make some kind of trade. But the problem with making a trade is that you got to give something up to get something, and so
Right.
I have a hard time pegging like where this team is in terms of like a win projection. Like I agree with you that like saying, okay, well, they were 81 last year. Are they better than last year? It's not totally the right way to look at it because I agree with you that they probably were better than that. And so maybe they improved a little bit, even just by the overall depth of their moves. So I maybe like 86, 87, 88 wins or something along those lines. And I would take that, but it's fringy, and you have a very decent chance of missing the playoffs altogether again, which would be, uh, 4 out of 5 years or 5 out of 6 years. It's or more. They've only made the playoffs 16, I think. So
So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So people are
Well,
fed up. They are
yeah. I
not
mean,
ready for another non-playoff season, and so there's a lot of
oh,
pressure on
I'm
them to win.
aware. I'm aware of that. I know. I'm still friends with many, many Giant fans, and the I think a lot of bad feelings would have been solved if they had eliminated LA in 2021 and went to the
Hmm.
NLCS. I absolutely believe that because
They
whether
were one swing away too.
they're
Game five,
yeah, yeah,
winning run at the plate,
yeah,
and Wilmer Flores check swing,
yeah,
bat taken out of his hands.
and they had some chances in Game 4 to settle the score in LA. I really thought the
Hmm.
Giants were going to win that series. The first three games, they just looked like the better team, and they just had to split. And they, give LA credit. They were a fine team too. Lest we forget, they won 106 games. And it's still insane that we have it set up the way that you could have a 107 win team and a 106 win team. Like, there's guaranteed like one of them will be eliminated before the LCS. It still will never make sense to me. But I digress. But one thing I will bring up along those lines is the fact that you are going to have they're not going to be playing as many in division games this year. It's going to be more of a balanced schedule. And I can't help but wonder if removing a few games against Los Angeles and San Diego and adding a few games against Pittsburgh and Miami and Washington and Cincinnati may just add 2 or 3 wins to their win total just right then and there. Instead of playing 19 games against LA and 19 games against San Diego, well, you're going to have some more of the tomato cans in there that you could, I think that may get them to 84 wins, even with the same team they had last year.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, it's been a tough division. The Dodgers have just, in the regular season, been the best team going for the last decade, and having to play them 19 times a year, that is no small task. And actually, the Giants, I with Jeff Snyder of Locked On Dodgers, we looked at the numbers. Giants played the Dodgers better than anybody over that period of
Mm-hmm.
time. They were close to 500. So I'm not saying that's repeatable necessarily, but somehow the Giants have always been a tough opponent for the Dodgers over the Dodgers stretch of dominance there, including in 2021. They went neck and neck, even with the 5 game series. I think they ended up even with the same number of wins and losses against each other in the season. But yeah, I'm not as much as I love the rivalry. I'm not going to miss having to play such a good team that many times a
I
year.
remember, as a Boston fan during those mid 2000s, those oh god, another Yankee series coming up, and there was like one year it was like the Yankees won 10 and the Red Sox won 9, and they finished the division tied, and so the Yankees won the division because they had one more win along the way, head to head. And you're just looking back on like, oh god, if that ball had blooped here, like, and of course, they also lost a couple of games to Tampa down the stretch when Tampa was terrible. So maybe you win a couple of those games, you win at the, but they just sometimes, I mean, they're thrilling, but they can be exhausting. It's like, oh god, didn't we just play them? Did we just play? And I know from here I live in L.A. County, and so I have so many connections to the Giants and the Giants fandom. I know that both sides get my Dodger fan friends like, I can't deal with another San Francisco series right now. I can't deal with another San Francisco series right now. And I can't help but wonder if like on your that adds like 2 or 3 games against the Pirates. No offense, Ethan, but the Pirates are going to stink. And the Pirates, of course, could play the role of the spoiler. Every year, there's a team out of the blue that just wins, and they stand up when the time is right. But look at I think the Giants made some fringe moves. I think the best thing you can hope for is that one of their young players from their farm system comes up and just gives the team a spark. And if they can make the playoffs, use that as a selling point to Otani, saying, hey, we have playoffs. I know you would never know that if you play for the Angels all these years, but there's actually a postseason you can play in, and you can play it in a beautiful ballpark in front of fans that when things are going great, Giant fans are incredible. And um, play for a region where you all want to see them win, but it's not this sense of, oh my God, I'm never gonna see them win before I die, and also a slightly more functional front office and ownership than what they have in Anaheim.
That would be a great outcome. And making the playoffs would be in and of
Yeah.
itself a great outcome. And then you're right, like a lot is riding on it because if you don't make it, not only are the fans here going to be upset, but then selling free agents on your team as a winner is going to be tough. And yeah, so a lot is riding on the season with a team that doesn't look like an obvious like 90 win team. And so it's gonna be an interesting year for the Giants. And one more thing about the Dodgers, I just had to mention. That's a big part of what went wrong last year is that their record against LA was like 4-15 or 5-14. And so if you just play closer to 500 ball against LA, you maybe sneak in to the playoffs as one of those last wild card teams, which it took what 87 wins or something for
and
the
and which
Phillies to get in. And
and they made it all the way to the World Series.
yeah, so it's just yeah, I mean the way the Giants did not play well against LA last year,
By the
so
way,
less games,
yeah,
fine by me.
I think the best thing that happened last year is the Phillies making the World Series. I know, so for some people they thought like, Jesus, what's the point? I mean, you had 300 win teams and none of them played in the league championship series. This is, but here's what I think is positive about it, and I'm going to relate to the Giants. It creates a sense of urgency to just get into one of those wild card spots. If you were going to be what the eighth, ninth, 10th seed in the NBA, you don't have a prayer. You don't have an effing prayer. Like, oh, congratulations, great. You played the little thing there. You're not going to make it past it. But in baseball, if you can get that spot and maybe ride it out a couple of good weeks, the Phillies showed you the blueprint. And here's why I think that's a positive thing for teams like San Francisco, like Milwaukee, like Philadelphia for that matter, teams that are on kind of the mid 80 win. Oh, should we go for it or should we rebuild? No, go for it, because the chances are slim that that's going to happen every year. And as a Giant fan, about in 2014 being the visiting team in the wild card game, and you're celebrating in Kansas City, but at the same time, for management to have that, for the lack of a better word, motivation to say, yeah, let's put the best product on the field. If we're hovering around 500, if we just improve by about 4 or 5 games, we could be in the playoffs, and who knows what happens after that. And so, like that mid 80 win range is so important for this Giants team. They're not better than Los Angeles. We all know that. They're not better than San Diego unless San Diego comes crashing to earth or has a big regression like the Giants did last year or like the White Sox did last year. But I think the chances of that are not very high. And if you're going to make any bets on that, go to wait, we already did that ad read. But I almost said the other one.
Forget them.
But yeah, it is so important. And maybe by midseason, if you see some teams are going to be selling off some of their players, go for it. Don't hesitate, because 85 wins, that should be put, I know nothing less than the World Series. Yeah, 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 yeah. 85 wins. How do you get to 85 wins? Because if they can log 85 wins this year and have a legit shot, 85 to Ohtani. In fact, that's what I'm going to call this episode, 85 to Ohtani. So there you go.
Yes, yeah, and at the trade deadline, they've shown a willingness to be aggressive if they're in position, and that was part of what was so frustrating at this year's deadline, is that they were just not quite there where it made sense to like make moves to go for it. They were a little short of that. But the year prior, locked in that race with LA, they went out and got Chris Bryant, and so if you can just be in good position in mid-July, then I think, mid-late July, then even that is, you might not be quite at that level then, but then you give yourself that move that pushes you into that territory, and that would help. And so they need to start well. They need to just kind of have a better summer. They had a rough middle of the season this year, but here's hoping it's better in 2023, even without Correa.
All right. Well, it's already going to be better. You're going to be on the show, and we're going to check in to see how we're doing for 85 to Ohtani. Ben Kasvik, where can people follow your show?
Everywhere. I mean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, at Ben Kasvik, Locked on Giants, on Twitter at Ben Kasvik. Yeah.
All right.
That's where.
Okay. And you can follow us at Locked on MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. Thanks so much for making Locked on MLB your first listen every day. For your second listen, obviously have that be Locked on Giants. But your third listen, have that be Locked on MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby, he's a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Doing take 2 of our off-season review with the always stable Giants and Ben Kasvik of Locked on Giants. This has been Locked on MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.